45 years earlier, 10 spies had seen giants at Hebron and told an entire nation to turn back. Now the men who had trembled were gone. Their children had crossed the Jordan. The land was being divided, and an 85-year-old man stepped forward with one extraordinary request. Caleb did not ask for the easiest valley, the safest pasture, or a quiet place to spend his final years. He asked for the hill country where the Anakim still lived behind fortified walls. He asked for the mountain that had terrified Israel. Why would an old man choose the place everyone else had feared? And why did that place have to be Hebron? The scene in Joshua 14 is easy to flatten into a lesson about courage. Yet its geography gives it far more power. Caleb was not making a general request for difficult land. He named the region connected with the original crisis. When the scouts traveled through Canaan decades earlier, they reached Hebron and encountered Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, descendants of Anak. The sight of those people became part of the evidence used to persuade Israel that the promise was impossible. Hebron was not merely another city on a map. It was where fear acquired a face. Numbers 13 begins with a mission of observation. 12 leaders enter the land to study its people, cities, soil, and produce. They traveled for 40 days. They saw fertile valleys, clusters of grapes, and towns protected by walls. They also saw the descendants of Anak at Hebron. The biblical text does not tell us the exact height of those people. It does not describe gray skin, monstrous faces, or the anatomy imagined by later art. It tells us that the scouts experienced them as formidable and that the report magnified that fear until the congregation saw itself as helpless. 10 scouts returned with a conclusion that sounded practical. The land was good, but the people were strong. The cities were fortified and very large. The descendants of Anak were there. In their final description, the scouts compared themselves to grasshoppers and connected the Nephilim with the sons of Anak. Whether that sentence reports a precise ancestry, frightened exaggeration, or the scouts' interpretation has been debated for centuries. What is not debated is its effect. The people stopped looking at the promise and began measuring themselves against the inhabitants. Caleb interrupted the panic. He did not deny the walls, the strength, or the danger. He did not pretend the scouts had seen nothing. He quieted the people and urged them to go up and take the land. His confidence was not a claim that Israel possessed superior bodies or better equipment. His confidence rested on the one who had promised the land. That difference matters. Biblical courage is not the refusal to see reality. It is the refusal to treat visible reality as the highest authority. Joshua stood with Caleb, but the majority report prevailed. The congregation cried through the night. The people spoke of returning to Egypt. They imagined defeat before taking a step forward. The crisis became more than fear of tall people. It became a rejection of the path on which God had led them. Numbers 14 remembers Caleb differently. He had another spirit and followed the Lord fully. That phrase becomes the key to the next 45 years. Caleb's distinction was not physical size. It was a settled loyalty that survived being outvoted. The judgment on that generation was severe. Those who had refused to enter would not receive the land they rejected. Yet Caleb was promised that he would go in, and that his descendants would possess the ground on which he had walked. Deuteronomy repeats the promise. The land under Caleb's feet would be given to him because he followed the Lord wholeheartedly. The promise was personal, geographical, and delayed. Caleb had walked through Hebron as a scout. One day he would return not as a frightened observer but as an heir. Then came the long middle of the story. The Bible does not describe a private speech from Caleb for every year in the wilderness. It gives no diary of his disappointment and no list of the funerals he witnessed. Yet the arithmetic is unavoidable. Caleb was 40 when Moses sent him to explore the land. 45 years later he stood before Joshua. Between those scenes stretched decades of waiting caused largely by the unbelief of others. Caleb had been faithful, but he still traveled with the community through the consequences of its rebellion. That waiting is one reason his request at 85 is so striking. A promise can sound powerful when it is new. It is harder to carry when years accumulate and circumstances change. Caleb had watched one generation disappear and another grow up. He had crossed dry country, followed the tabernacle, buried familiar voices, and entered a land still requiring courage. The promise had not removed time from his body. It had given time a direction. When the territory was being assigned, Caleb approached Joshua at Gilgal. He reminded him of the word the Lord had spoken through Moses. This was not a demand invented in old age. It was an appeal to a promise already given. Caleb said that he had been 40 years old when he was sent from Kadesh Barnea, and that he brought back a report according to his conviction. His companions made the people's hearts melt, but he wholly followed the Lord. Then Caleb spoke about his age. He said that the Lord had kept him alive for 45 years and that he was now 85. He also declared that he remained as strong for going out and coming in as he had been when Moses sent him. The statement should not be turned into a medical formula promising every faithful person identical strength at the same age. It is a testimony inside Caleb's unique calling. The same man who had been promised the land had been preserved to receive it. Caleb's next words form the heart of the film. "Give me this hill country." He acknowledged that the Anakim were there and that the cities were large and fortified. He did not ask Joshua to pretend the danger had vanished. He named it. Then he said that perhaps the Lord would be with him and he would drive them out, just as the Lord had spoken. The word perhaps is not unbelief. It is humility. Caleb trusted the promise without speaking, as though God were a tool under his command. Why choose that mountain? The first answer is that it was the land connected with the promise. Deuteronomy says Caleb would receive the ground on which he had walked. Numbers places the scouts at Hebron. Caleb was asking for the physical place where faith and fear had once separated the 12. The request therefore reversed the old report. The mountain was not random territory, it was unfinished testimony. The second answer is that Hebron represented the argument of the 10 scouts at its strongest. If Caleb had chosen an undefended plain, observers might have said that time had made the promise easier. Instead, the Anakim and fortified cities were still part of the description. Caleb did not seek a symbolic victory over a memory. He asked for the actual location associated with the obstacle. Faith returned to the exact ground from which fear had retreated. The third answer lies in Hebron's deeper biblical memory. Long before the scouts arrived, Abraham had lived near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron and built an altar there. Sarah died in the region, and Abraham acquired the cave of Machpelah as a burial possession. Isaac and Jacob were later connected with the same family burial place. Caleb's request occurs inside a landscape already marked by ancestral promise, worship, grief, and hope. The text does not say that this patriarchal history was Caleb's stated motive, so we should not invent a speech for him. But the reader of Scripture can recognize the resonance. Hebron also carried another name, Kiriath Arba. Joshua explains that Arba was associated with Anak and describes him, in one textual tradition, as the greatest man among the Anakim. Translations differ over whether the phrase points directly to Arba or more generally to a great figure. The safest conclusion is that the older name connected the city with a leading ancestor of the Anakite clans. The city was remembered not only for walls but for lineage. Who, then, were the Anakim? The Hebrew Bible presents them as a people renowned for unusual stature and feared by those who encountered them. Deuteronomy groups them with the Rephaim in the way ancient peoples classified imposing inhabitants of the land. The Emim and Zamzummim are described with similar language in neighboring territories. These names belong to the Bible's ancient geography and memory. They should not be compressed carelessly into one modern fantasy species. The relationship between the Anakim and the Nephilim requires special care. Numbers 13:33 records the scouts saying that they saw the Nephilim and that the sons of Anak came from them. Some readers take this as direct genealogy. Others note that the line occurs in a report designed to terrify the congregation and may reflect rhetorical exaggeration. Genesis 6 mentions the Nephilim before the flood and also includes the difficult phrase, "and also afterward," but it gives no family tree connecting them to Anak. Scripture preserves the association without explaining its mechanics. That uncertainty does not make the Anakim ordinary in the narrative. The scouts were not frightened by an abstract word. They had seen adults whose size and reputation appeared overwhelming. Later texts continue to remember the Anakim as tall and formidable. But the Bible gives no verified measurement for Ahiman, Sheshai, Talmai, Anak, or Arba. Every exact height placed on a cinematic figure is therefore artistic reconstruction. This film uses towering human-like highlanders to make the scale visible while refusing to present that design as an archaeological photograph. The same honesty applies to archaeology. Hebron is one of the ancient cities of the Southern Hill Country, with a history far larger than any one episode. Archaeology can study settlement layers, walls, pottery, agriculture, and regional change. It has not produced a scientifically verified skeleton proving the giant dimensions often claimed in sensational posts. The biblical question should not be made dependent on fabricated photographs or newspaper legends. The text itself asks whether Israel will trust God in the presence of people it perceives as stronger. Joshua blessed Caleb and gave him Hebron as an inheritance. The blessing came before the result. Caleb received the right to pursue the promise, not a furnished city with every obstacle already removed. This pattern is easy to miss. Inheritance did not mean passivity. The gift created a responsibility to act. The old man left Joshua's presence with a word, a mountain, and work still ahead. The landscape of Hebron is not a flat desert. It rises through limestone ridges, terrace slopes, valleys, vineyards, groves, springs, and cold highland air. A fortified city in that setting could dominate roads and surrounding fields. The approach would expose travelers to watchtowers above them. The visual power of the story comes from vertical scale. An older man climbing toward a high city, walls rising over the ridge, and towering inhabitants watching from stone gates. Joshua 15 names 3 descendants of Anak: Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. These are the same names encountered when the scouts came to Hebron in Numbers 13. The repetition closes a 45-year circle. The people who had embodied the first report remained attached to the place Caleb requested. The narrative does not replace the feared inhabitants with anonymous figures. It carries the names forward so the reader can recognize that the old challenge has returned. The text says Caleb drove them out from Hebron. It does not give a detailed scene-by-scene account of the confrontation. There is no speech between Caleb and the 3 leaders, no measurement of their bodies, and no catalogue of dramatic blows. A responsible film, therefore, should not fill the silence with graphic spectacle. It can show fortified gates, opposing ranks, movement through the highlands, the withdrawal of the Anakite clans, and Caleb entering the city. The theological point is not violence for entertainment. It is the reversal of a verdict. Judges 1 tells the story again in the context of Judah's campaigns and says that Judah went against the inhabitants of Hebron, where Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai were defeated. Later in the same chapter, Caleb's possession of Hebron is affirmed. Readers sometimes ask whether Caleb acted alone, whether Judah acted through Caleb's clan, or whether Joshua and Judges are emphasizing different levels of the same event. The accounts need not be forced into competing movies. Ancient biblical narrative can attribute an action to a leader, a clan, and a tribe from complementary angles. Caleb was not a solitary superhero detached from covenant community. Joshua blessed him. Judah had a role. Caleb's descendants would inherit the land. His courage was personal, but its fruit was communal. Even the statement about his strength does not turn him into a mythical body beyond human limits. The Bible honors a mature servant whose endurance allowed him to lead others toward a promise that had outlived an entire generation. That distinction matters because the story is often told as though Caleb won by wanting the challenge more than everyone else. Desire alone is not the center. Caleb repeatedly grounds his hope in what the Lord had said and whether the Lord would be with him. The mountain was not a test of positive thinking. It was the location where a divine promise and a feared reality met. The 3 Anakite names also prevent the word giant from becoming a faceless category. They belonged to communities, families, and a city with its own memory. Biblical faith does not require turning opponents into cartoon monsters. The text presents conflict over land within an ancient world, and the moral claims of that conquest raise serious questions for modern readers. Those questions deserve honest study. The film's narrow purpose is to follow Caleb's literary arc without pretending that every ancient complexity has disappeared. What makes Caleb's victory distinctive is not that he never felt the weight of the mountain. Joshua 14 does not say he was incapable of fear. It says he followed fully. Faithfulness is not a personality type reserved for people who feel no anxiety. It is allegiance that decides which voice receives final authority. 45 years earlier, 10 voices said the obstacle defined the future. Caleb said the promise did. His age strengthens that contrast. At 40, he had the energy to explore. At 85, he had the memory to understand what the mountain meant. He was not returning to a place he knew only from a story told by his parents. He had seen its walls and inhabitants himself. The land before his eyes now carried two reports, the report that melted hearts and the promise that kept him alive. His request chose which report would govern his final chapter. There is a sober warning here for the generation that followed him. The children of those who refused the land could inherit courage from Caleb, but they could not borrow his memory automatically. Every generation has to decide what it will do with inherited testimony. The mountain may be the same while the people standing below it are new. Caleb becomes a bridge between the failed entry and the renewed opportunity. There is also a message about delayed promises. Caleb's 45 years were not proof that the word had failed. Neither were they empty time. He learned to remain faithful without immediate possession. Yet the story does not romanticize delay as an end in itself. A day arrived when waiting had to become action. Mature faith knew when to keep walking through the wilderness and when to say, "Give me this mountain." Hebron later became important in Israel's story. It was assigned as a Levitical city and a city of refuge, while its surrounding fields belonged to Caleb. David would reign there before ruling from Jerusalem. Those later developments broadened the city's significance, but they should not be read backward as Caleb's private knowledge. In his moment, the central facts were simpler. This was promised ground, the Anakim were there, and the Lord had not changed. The conclusion of Joshua 14 says that the land had rest from war. That sentence follows the gift of Hebron and turns attention from one man's request to the larger purpose of settlement. Rest in Joshua is not laziness. It is ordered life after instability and conflict. Caleb's mountain belongs inside that movement from wandering toward inheritance. The goal was not endless confrontation with giants. The goal was a place where families and communities could live under the covenant. So why did Caleb ask for Hebron? Because it was the ground he had walked. Because it was bound to a promise. Because it still held the obstacle that had defined Israel's fear. Because faith does not always seek a new location where the old question can be avoided. Sometimes it returns to the place where trust failed and allows obedience to give a different answer. The story also corrects the idea that old age means the end of meaningful calling. Caleb did not deny his age. He announced it. His years made the faithfulness of God measurable. Yet this is not permission to shame anyone whose body is frail. Scripture celebrates a particular gift of strength for a particular task. The deeper pattern is available to every generation. Purpose is not determined only by the calendar, and long waiting does not make obedience obsolete. For viewers fascinated by giants, Hebron offers a disciplined mystery. The Anakim are real participants in the biblical narrative, but their exact bodies remain undescribed. They are associated with the language of the Rephaim and, in the Scouts report, with the Nephilim. The connections are suggestive, not complete. The most cinematic detail is also the most textual. Caleb knowingly asked for their mountain. Imagine the final ascent without adding words Scripture never records. Limestone beneath worn sandals. Terraces climbing toward dark walls. Watchers above the gate. An older leader moving forward with a community behind him. The visual scale says what the text has already said. The obstacle remained large. But size had ceased to be the verdict. When the gates of Hebron finally opened, the event answered a sentence spoken 45 years earlier. The 10 scouts had said, "We are not able." Caleb had said, "We should go up." Decades separated the competing declarations, but the mountain remembered both. The inheritance did not erase the years. It revealed what Caleb's loyalty had been carrying through them. And the question travels beyond Hebron. What happens when a promise survives longer than the generation that first heard it? What happens when the person who believed must wait while others refuse? Caleb's life offers no shortcut through those years. It offers a way to inhabit them. Follow fully, remember accurately, refuse to let fear rewrite the promise, and be ready when the moment to act arrives. The giants are not the center of the story. They are the scale against which the story displays faithfulness. Caleb is not the center either. His repeated confession points beyond himself. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord said. The mountain, the walls, the old age, and the remembered names all serve that conviction. At 85, Caleb did not ask for an easy ending. He asked for the place where unbelief had begun. Joshua blessed him. Hebron became his inheritance. The 3 descendants of Anak were driven from the city, and the feared ground became testimony. 45 years after a nation turned away, one faithful man returned to the mountain and finished his report. But one mystery remains. Were the Anakim truly descendants of the Nephilim, as the frightened scouts claimed, or was that ancient giant language being used to magnify a people whose origin the Bible never explains? The next investigation begins with a single phrase in Numbers, "And there we saw the Nephilim." It may be the most consequential line in the entire report, and the most difficult to interpret honestly.